This week on the Trent Out Loud podcast. On the Breakfast Club, you spoke about giving Kanye West grace. Yep. I want to dig a little deeper into that. When you had the Red Table Talk, Jada introduced you as a pioneering psychologist who literally wrote the mental health handbook.
It is okay to go get support for yourself, your emotions, and your mind. But there's just too much negative connotation associated with mental health for people to be able to yet see it in that way.
I think a lot of people feel like they have an issue with therapy because diagnoses are subjective. What do you say to people that say that? What is going on with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and getting you in the White House? Could you tell us the three different types of depression? There's bipolar, there's major depressive disorder, and then there's persistent depressive disorder. Can you just give us a quick definition of the three? Can men have daddy issues?
100%.
You said there's something about the absence of chaos that makes us have to deal with ourselves.
Ooh.
Is therapy always a lifelong journey? Is there ever an end to it?
Are you not valuable enough to invest in yourself so you can be the best version of yourself?
You said medication is not a happy pill. It's about helping people who are suffering so badly that they can't even do talk therapy. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're laughing at my sound effects.
Couldn't get mine to work. I tried it. I'm not good at you, so I need to get some lessons.
I'll help you after. Welcome to the Trent Out Loud podcast. I am your host, Trent Out Loud, and I have a very, very, very special guest with me today. Somebody who I admire with like the utmost amount of respect. When I grow up, I want to be just like her, and happy to call her a friend of mine. Let me introduce her properly. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Alfiee Breland-Noble, professionally known as Dr. Alfiee, is a pioneering psychologist, scientist, author, mental health correspondent, and the founder of the AAKOMA Project. Dr. Alfiee is a regular media correspondent on CNN, Insider, the New York Times, Washington Post, and she is also the Chief Mental Wealth Officer at Charlamagne the God's Mental Wealth Alliance. She has co-hosted short films with Lady Gaga called The Power of Kindness. Dr. Alfiee has also been a guest on the Red Table Talk with Jada Pickett Smith, Today's Show, and of course, The Breakfast Club, my favorite show. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for my guest, Dr. Alfiee. Yay! How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for asking, Trent. It's been so great to be connected to you, all this time, and to learn from you and to watch you and to just enjoy your journey as an entrepreneur and as a Black man who's willing to openly and honestly speak about mental health. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. But how are you? Are you doing good? How are you doing?
I am, like, physically I'm healthy, right? My mom used to say, God rest her soul, if you got your health, you got everything. And so my physical health is good. I had an opportunity to like really meditate this morning. So it was like a guided meditation for 30 minutes. I bought this app called Mind Valley. Everybody knows this guy. I forget his name, but he's all over YouTube and everything. And so I bought the app a couple weeks ago and have been digging in on some of the meditations. And this morning I did a guided meditation. It was fabulous. And so that really set me on a good path for today. So I appreciate you asking me. And even with like little dips and stuff in my day, just the having had that opportunity to meditate really just put me in the right headspace all day. So I'm grateful for the question, and I am doing really, really well today, actually.
Good. I'm happy to hear that. I meditated today for the first time in 2 weeks for 10 minutes. My therapist said, Dr. Martin Luther King said, when he had his busiest days, those are the days where he took time out to meditate. So I know how important meditation is, even though I'm not really great at it, but we'll maybe touch that in one of the questions.
Yes.
All right. So the goal of my podcast today is very ambitious. I want to try to get every listener out there who does not go to therapy to go to therapy. This is our goal, okay?
I love it. Think big.
This is my goal, exactly. But my podcast is also about life, love, and legacy. I've watched tons of interviews with you and read And I want to get to know you personally a little bit better. So we'll go through, some of my therapy questions and stuff, but I really want to make sure we have a little bit of time to get to know you a little bit better. Okay.
Yes.
Let's first start out with what is the main mission for the AAKOMA Project, and what are your and Charlamagne's mission with Mental Wealth Alliance? Because I know just want to be clear, they're two separate entities, but I know that they work in tandem together with similar missions. So what are those missions?
Absolutely. So I'll start with Char and my mission with the Mental Wealth Alliance, and that is 3 pillars: train, treat, and teach. And Charlamagne's nonprofit is really all about focusing on Black mental health. Like, Char is really into uplifting and supporting the Black diaspora. That's all of us, right? That's Black Caribbean folks, that's Black Canadian folks, right? That's Black African folks. That's what we traditionally think of as African American. That's Black Latinos, Latina people. And so for Black people, Char's mission is really about trying to get 10 million Black people into therapy in 10 years, right? So that's really just like you, like this mission, everybody should go to therapy. And he's very clear. He's focused on Black folks, right? And so that's, clearly I'm a Black woman. He's a Black man. And, we do the expo every year. This will be our 3rd year of the expo later in the fall in October, probably the Saturday or Sunday before World Mental Health Day. You need to come, right? So you put it on your radar.
I sent you a text message, by the way. I know you're super busy, but I tried to come. But as a Canadian, you need an American address. I even tried to put my cousin's address, and it wouldn't let me get tickets.
Okay, we'll
talk about that.
We got time, but we're gonna work on that because you need to be there. So that's the Mental Wealth Alliance, and then the AAKOMA Project. A lot of people don't know. I started the AAKOMA Project as my research lab when I was an academic. So most of my career was in academic medicine in departments of psychiatry. And I started the AAKOMA Project in 1999. We were incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit in 2019. So that beautiful 20-year arc really got me to a space where I understood, I know what my purpose on this planet is. And my purpose is manifested through the AAKOMA Project, where we are about 3 things: raising consciousness, empowering people, and changing the system of mental health for marginalized young people, youth, and young adults. And of course, they don't exist in a vacuum. So that also means we support the communities, the families around them. And the real idea is, how do we uplift these conversations about mental health so that everyone can see themselves centered in that conversation? So that's what we're about at the AAKOMA Project. We are one of the rare entities as a 501c3 nonprofit focused not only on the mental health of young people of color, also inclusive of intersectional identities. People are not either disabled or of color. They're not either LGBTQIA+ or of color. Sometimes they're all of those things together. So we're mindful of that. And most importantly, we generate the knowledge that we speak from. So when we talk about evidence-based, our evidence, we generate that evidence, and we are very focused on making sure it's inclusive of all different kinds of folks, so that the literature and the knowledge that we share is not just for a tiny segment of the population, it's for all of us. And one other thing I'll say real quickly is, one of my pet peeves, I can't stand it, is when people do research studies and they say like Black, Latino, and other. Other's not a racial category, right? So at the AAKOMA Project, we don't do that. We want to talk about, as much as we can, really uplifting and describing the labels that people use to identify themselves. So that's what we do. That's who we are. And those are the 2 organizations.
Wow. Well, congratulations for that. What is going on with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and getting you in the White House? Like, what petition do I have to start online to get you a position in their cabinet? Because I know that you guys have worked together with them a little bit, but talk to us a little bit about that, and I'm going to try to get you into that cabinet, okay?
So we got a couple things we're going to work on, right? For me, I love the question, because in addition to you, I have another good friend, Carson Daly from the Today Show, who has said exactly the same things. Like, what's up? I'm like, look, I don't know. If I knew, I would be in there. So, you know, I did have the good fortune of being invited to the White House by Dr. Joe Biden twice. But translating that into us doing this work, I don't know, Trent. Like, Maybe you and Carson can get together, start a petition, and we can like get me in there.
I
And then
will.
the other thing is, what would really help, like which I've also been working on, it helps to have verification on Instagram. Like explain like why I'm still not verified. I have no idea. Like I don't know what other criteria I need to meet. But that carries weight. And so I
For
think
sure.
I will credit them, even though I'm not part of it. I need to be, you right. I will credit them for this new initiative or directive that they put out last night. I think it was after the State of the Union address about youth mental health. The first bullet that they're going to focus on is equity, equitable mental health
Oh,
care
I
for
saw
young
that.
people of color, right? And
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
oh yeah, that was me. And then I saw, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, maybe a month, maybe like last fall, last winter, the Surgeon General, who I'm going to be with in a few days, like talking about youth mental health, where they talked about culturally relevant mental health. And I was like, now, I know y'all got that from me because, before I was saying, I don't know anybody who was saying it, which is part of why I left
Of course.
academia, because I was always talking about
Yeah.
it needs to be culturally relevant so everybody can see themselves in it. And people were like, yeah, whatever, Alfie, whatever. And so to know that my words are there, I know I'm not the only person who says it, but I don't know a whole lot of other people who were saying it 10 years ago, right? So I know those are
Exactly.
not just my words and that, but I am grateful that people are paying attention, right? And I think that only
Sure.
happens when you have that kind of representation at that level. So I got to shout out, my fellow Howard University Bison, Vice President Harris. And I know that because she's there and because you have a Dr. Murthy, who has South Asian background and ancestry,
Yeah.
the conversations can happen. So I don't know what we got to do, but I'm here for
Exactly.
it. So whatever we got to do, count me in. We got to do something.
I don't know if you know, but Kamala Harris went to school in Montreal, so I'll try to find somebody here who knows her. Yeah, she used to live in Montreal before she was up here for like 2 or 3 years,
But
and
still,
yeah, exactly. And because when I was on your show and you posted about me, Carson Daly follows me. I feel so cool. I'm like, yo, Carson Daly, yo, it's TRL. Yo.
Carson's
So
a
yeah,
good dude, right?
yeah,
TR
he's a
every
good
time.
dude.
And I know he blushes, but I'm just like,
Yeah,
Carson, you cannot divorce yourself from TRL. That's like how
yeah,
we
facts.
all know you. So, that's
Exactly.
awesome. I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah, yeah. Shout out to you for that. All right. So when you're on the Red Table Talk, Jada introduced you as a pioneering psychologist who literally wrote the mental health handbook. Could you explain that to me?
Yes. So in 2016, I published a book called The Handbook of Mental Health for African American Youth. That was one. I
Right.
also had the good fortune of working with, because the picture that they showed was this amazing book that I worked on with this. You have to know him. He's an incredible human being. You might want him on your show. His name is Mark Batson, and he goes
Okay.
by King Mark Batson. And Mark is also a fellow Howard alum. I think we either the same year. Might have been a year ahead of me. Mark is a super producer. So, matter of fact, Mark just won a Grammy for New Age Music a couple nights ago,
Wow.
which I'm like so
Wow.
excited for him for. But where people really know him is he wrote the theme song for Power Force, which is Tommy's power show on
Oh, okay.
Stars. He wrote that
Okay.
theme. And more importantly, he has multiple Grammys he has one with Beyonce, I think for Crazy in Love, with LeAnn Rimes, country music, Anthony Hamilton, Alicia Keys. He's a super producer who used to be like one of the main senior producers for Dr. Dre at
Okay.
Aftermath. And
Wow.
so Mark is really into spirituality and new age and manifestations and speaking positively over yourself. I've never seen this brother angry or upset. And
Wow.
so 2 years ago, we published a book together on mental health that's on Amazon. So if you Google Mark Batson and Dr. Alfiee, the book will come up, and it's a workbook. So
Gotcha.
she's talking about that book as well. And then there's
Gotcha.
another book that she wasn't talking about, but those are the two books that she means when she said literally wrote a book, handbook on mental health.
Gotcha.
There are two of them. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Well,
Yeah.
everybody go on Amazon and get that out. All right. Okay. Let's get in. Now, I just wanted to get everybody a little bit more accustomed to your background in therapy, so that when you answer these questions, they know that they're speaking with an expert. All right. Let's get into some therapy questions. All right.
Yes.
I think through talking with some people before doing this podcast with you, and doing some research, I think there's two big reasons why people are hesitant to go to therapy. And I want to know what you think about it. One is we live such a fast-paced life. Everybody's doing a million things. Kids, hockey practice, football practice, got to
Yeah.
make the dinner, all that stuff. And I
Yeah.
just think that people assume that therapy is sitting down on the couch crying about your childhood, and they're like, I don't have time for that. I got life to live, you know?
Right.
That's why I'm such a huge advocate of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes.
Exactly. So could you do me a favor? And I try to explain it, but I mean, you're an expert. Could you explain to us what cognitive behavior therapy is and the benefits of it?
Yes. So you and I have had a similar conversation in the past. So I will answer your question directly, and then I'll give my little thoughts on CBT. So
Okay.
cognitive behavioral therapy is really thinking about our emotions and our mental health from the perspective of like sort of like the holy triangle. There's thoughts, there's behaviors, and there's feelings, and they all impact each other, right? So that is cognitive behavioral therapy in a nutshell. It's the intersection of thoughts, behaviors, and feelings because they all contribute to each other. And in cognitive behavioral therapy, what you're learning as a person, as a client or a patient, is you're working with the provider to help you make those connections and then to teach you skills so you can better manage the relationship of all those things, right? So for example, when you're working with someone in cognitive behavioral therapy, they might teach you about the downward spiral that is associated with a person who might have depressive illness, right? So the one of my favorite examples is, okay, you get up in the morning, you get dressed, you're starting off the day, okay, it's gonna be a good day, it's gonna be okay. And then you walk outside and you see you got two different pairs of shoes on, right? You got one Air Force One and you got one J, right? Or whatever, like a Yeezy and something else. And so immediately your thought is, oh, I'm so stupid. How could I make that mistake? Right? That's your thought. Your feeling might be you start to feel sadness, you start to feel a little anxious, you start to feel, I don't know, worry or any number of other negative emotions. And what then happens to your behavior? You encounter your friend at the bus stop. You say, hey man, what's up? You're like, man, F you. I ain't got time for that, right? So your behavior is in direct response to the thoughts and the feelings that you had as a direct outgrowth of something as simple as you have mismatched shoes on, right? So with CBT, you're taught to isolate and identify self-talk. So instead of saying, oh, I'm so stupid, you're like, oh, well, I guess I'm about to be fly today because ain't nobody else got this combination of shoes on, right? And then you feel better, you feel more empowered. Then when your friend sees you, you feel like, hey man, what's up? Be like, yeah, man, I'm balling today. Look at my shoes, right? You need to get with this. So it really helps you learn how to take better care of yourself, how to take better care of your mind, how to pay attention to what those thoughts are, which then impact your feelings and your behaviors. That's what I would say in a nutshell with an illustrative example is CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy.
Wow. Hold on. Yo. That was amazing. Listen, I've been doing cognitive behavior therapy for 2-3 years. And shout out to my therapist who I love, but I just got another way of understanding what he is doing and how he's helping me. That was brilliant. Oh, and look, when I was talking with my cousin before, this is he's like, because I'm like, people go to a dentist, you go to a mechanic, and they tell you something is wrong with your car. He's like, I feel like a lot of people will go to see a psychologist, but what are they going to tell me? How are they? But I'm like, no, and you just explained, that's what you tell me. You don't necessarily have to be having a bad childhood or even a bad day. You provide skills to help you cope with life. And all of us are living life.
Correct. And I think the difference between the car needing repair or your teeth needing, I don't know, like a filling, or you just need a teeth cleaning, or you need fluoride painted on your teeth, is there is not a negative connotation associated with you going to get that kind of help. It's sort of normalized and expected. Like you can't get from point A to point B if your car is broken down, so you go get it fixed. You don't want your teeth to fall out, so you have to get, I don't know, like implants and dentures or whatever. So you take care of your teeth. But I think with mental health, there's something about the way we talk about it that makes people feel ashamed. So it's not like a car is going to break down. I think there's this expectation of perfectionism. So you're just going to be mentally fine just no matter what. And we don't account for the ways in which we're not mentally fine all the time because there's so much stuff coming at us. And so there's this idea you should just be able to handle it, where we would never say your car should just function. Like nobody buys a car and expects to never have any problems with the car. And I think to your point, and the mission that you're on is we want to help reframe these things for people so that they can understand just what you said. It is okay to go get support for yourself, your emotions, and your mind. But there's just too much negative connotation associated with mental health for people to be able to yet see it in that way.
Exactly. Okay, gosh, I have so many questions. I have to get to it. So the second issue is, I think a lot of people feel like they have an issue with therapy because diagnoses are subjective. Like so you could go to the doctor and they'd be like, hey, we tested your blood, you have cancer. It's definite. But mental health, therapy, diagnosis, it's not always an exact diagnosis, and you could get two different opinions. What do you say to people that say that?
I say, this is part of why the mission of AAKOMA Project is so real. So succinctly stated, we have to do a better job of providing labels and diagnoses that do two things at once. They resonate with people because they make sense, and they feel appropriate given what's being presented to us. So I'll give you a quick example. One of the reasons people get turned off to these labels is because labels get applied differently depending on who's sitting in front of you and depending on who's doing the diagnosing. One of the best, most important, consistent, and persistent ways that this shows up is around the diagnosis of disruptive behavior problems, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, and differences by race. Another way this shows up is autism diagnoses, such that Black children get diagnosed anywhere from 6 months to a year later than white kids, right? That's a problem because you can't get services if you don't have the right label. So I think when people have these kinds of experiences, or they see these things, or they hear these stories from loved ones, it makes them less likely to accept what people are putting in front of them because of exactly what you said. It is completely so often subjective because we have not spent enough time trying to understand how do these things look different across different groups, and how can we create a standard that sort of reaches to the middle that is able to most accurately touch the most people. And I think we struggle with that in our field.
Understood. By the way, my last comment about getting to my questions is I would love to have you on for friggin' 3 or 4 hours. Your team said I could only have an hour, so that's the only reason why I'm rushing. Blame them.
I love it.
All right, so part kind of B to that is that my therapist suggested that I see a psychiatrist to get a second opinion after he diagnosed me with being bipolar.
Got it.
My question is that I went on a 1 hour Zoom call with the psychiatrist. He asked me questions for an hour, and then he was able to diagnose me and agree with my therapist's diagnosis of me being bipolar. How can a psychiatrist or psychologist find that out by asking questions? I'm just trying to understand from your end, how asking questions and how I answer. Is it only my answers? Is it how I'm answering? Is it my body language? How do you guys diagnose somebody with a mental health illness?
Such a good question, Trent. That is such an insightful question. I'm gonna tell you, traditionally, the way that both of us are taught to do it is from a psychologist's perspective. So you're talking about a PhD or somebody with a master's in psychology. The way they're diagnosing is we have this big book, thick old book. I wish I had one around here. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Let me tell you how that book is developed. You get a whole bunch of folks with mental health alphabet soup behind their names. Clinical social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, right? So on and so forth. Researchers, clinicians, policymakers, and they say, here's a set of symptoms. If you have this many of these 10 symptoms over this period of time, right? So for depression, let's say there are 10 different symptoms that are associated with depression. If you have 4 or 5 of those that consistently show up over a 2-week period, we would say you meet criteria for this type of depression. Like it used to be called dysthymia. Now it's called persistent depressive disorder, right? So that's like a low-grade depression. Think Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh.
Yes.
All right. So the only way I can know which of these criteria or symptoms you have is to ask you questions.
Yes.
That is why I'm asking you questions. So the bulk of it is that I'm matching the answers that you give me against my list. That's one way.
Okay.
Then when you do an intake, the first time you go visit, that's why they ask you all these questions about your childhood, right? Or they may ask background. Is it in your family? Do you know anybody else who has it? You know what I mean? Like, what kind of home life do you have? Because those are contextual factors, or what we call social determinants of health. So if I'm a good clinician, I want to know what's in the social circle around you, what's in your environment, because that's also going to inform. So if you were to say to me, well, I have an aunt, on my mom's side who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Okay, that's reinforcement, because literature tells us that if you have a first degree relative, like a parent or a sibling, or even a second degree relative, an aunt or uncle, then part of what happens is that the genetic code, right, is flowing through you too. So that's another reason why we ask all those background questions. And then finally, when you talk about it from a psychiatric perspective, it really doesn't matter what the alphabet soup is, as long as the person is licensed and has been trained. So a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a clinical social worker, any one of those people is qualified as a licensed professional to offer that diagnosis. But remember, it's called the practice of medicine. It is not called the fact of medicine. It is the practice of psychotherapy. So we're really giving you our best assessment based on the information that you give us. And that is how people make diagnoses. And sometimes you want a second opinion because you just want to double check that what you're telling a person is accurate. And you want them to have a second opinion, especially around some of the disorders that we're dealing with, because I don't want to give you meds or I don't want to give you treatment for that disorder if I'm not confident and you're not comfortable with my diagnosis. So I hope that's clear, but that's generally how we do diagnosing.
Yeah, I think it's clear, and it makes sense, because even though that I get these diagnoses, it's never like, this is a diagnosis and this is what you have to do. It's like, here's all the information. Trent, would you like to take medication? How would you like to deal with your bipolar disorder? And I chose to not take medication and deal with it through talk therapy.
There you go. That's
Nice.
it.
Okay.
And that's the kind of mental health professional you want, someone who's empowering you to collaboratively make decisions. I always tell, when I used to treat patients full time, I would tell them, I'm like the GPS. You drive the bus. I can just give you, right? So, like if you use Apple Maps, it gives you 2 or 3 different ways to go. You pick which way you want to go, but we're still trying to all get you to that one destination. So I love what your therapist did for you. That's important. It's critical.
Amazing. Okay. Could you tell us the 3 different types of depression? From what I heard you say is there's bipolar, there's major depressive disorder, and then there's persistent depressive disorder. Can you just give us a quick definition of the 3?
Yes. So when you're talking about bipolar disorder, you're really talking about mania or highs, right? And depression or the lows. So a person who is cyclically experiencing either those highs or those lows, remember I said you have a certain number of criteria over a certain period of time. That some people experience that rapidly, right? Because there are multiple types of bipolar disorder, bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. So some people experience it rapidly. Some people it's a little more slow in terms of when these things show up. The frequency and the regularity with which one or the other, the mania, the highs, or the depression, the lows show up. That's bipolar disorder. Then when you're talking about dysthymia, it's a general low grade. Like I said, think Eeyore, just always kind of down, not so down that it's debilitating. You can't get out of the bed and that kind of thing. You're functioning. I'll tell you a colloquial term, a term that people love to use, which is what we talked about on Red Table Talk, is they call it high functioning depression.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't like that terminology of functioning because it's pejorative. It has like a connotation to it. So it's not high functioning. It's just your depression is not leaving you bedridden, right? Or it's not making you, say, isolated in the house. And then there's major depressive disorder, which is periodically, or sometimes it's persistent, right? You have depression to such a degree that it impairs your ability to go about your day-to-day life, right? I always say, like, the person who's in the bed with the covers over their head, they can't get out, or it takes all their strength to get out and go to work on a day-to-day basis, or they consistently have to miss work or miss school because they just can't function outside of the house because that depression is just weighing on them so heavily. So when we talk about depressive illness, you're absolutely right. Those are the 3 that we most commonly talk about, and those are some of the ways in which we describe them.
I really wanted you to emphasize that because I want people to rewind this part and watch it and listen to what you just said very carefully, because I would say 99% of people think depression is in my bed, underneath covers, and I'm crying and I can't leave the bed. And it's so much more vast than that.
Correct.
All right. On the Breakfast Club, you spoke about giving Kanye West grace.
Yep.
I want to dig a little deeper into that. Kanye
Yep.
West was diagnosed having bipolar disorder, and we
Yep.
all know his recent rants. He lost deals, he lost partnerships.
He lost a truckload of money.
Exactly. Close to $1 billion. I've been meaning to ask my therapist about this, but I'm so caught up in my own self. I'm like, I don't want to know about Kanye. But I do want to ask you, if Kanye West was having a manic episode and he was off of his meds and we know that he has these issues, to what extent should we as a society and his partners and should he be held accountable if we know that he has a disorder?
I wouldn't say he's not accountable. That's the idea of grace. Grace is patient, loving kindness. That's all it is. It is not making excuses for people. So when I say extend grace, I think about if you knew somebody had a terminal illness and they were doing stuff like, I'm going to go spend all this money, I'm giving all my money to charity because I know I only have so many months to live. I don't think anybody would look at that and say, what in the world is wrong with them, right? You have context. What I'm saying is there is no excuse for anti-Semitism. There's none. There's no excuse for racism. You know, when he says stuff like slavery was a choice, clearly that is not somebody who is thinking in their right mind. Like, how could you even believe that that person is thinking in their right mind? So I would say, come back to this idea of patient, loving kindness. And it is just to say, no, he doesn't get a pass for saying that stuff, but put it in context. So when I say grace, I just say put it in context. Yes, those comments should be condemned. Yes, we speak out against that foolishness. And there is a duty and a responsibility for the people around him to not enable that behavior to persist. If he can't manage it, if you're a spouse, if you're a partner, if you're a business partner, you have a responsibility to say, okay, man, now you either going to go get these meds and take them and stop this foolishness, and I'm going to help you find this therapist, and you need to go be with that person 2-3 times a week until you get your mind right, or we can't work together. But what we can't do, again, hear me say, I'm not making excuses for Kanye. It's ridiculous, the stuff he said. What we can't do is leave him out there to his own devices. I don't know who's helping him stay on his meds. I don't know who's getting him in front of a therapist. It doesn't look like anybody's trying to do it. But then turn around after it's going on and on and on and say, oh my God, what is wrong with him? Like, this is ridiculous. I can't believe he's doing this. Of course you can believe it because he's not taking his meds and he's clearly not in any kind of consistent treatment. So with all of that said, you can't make anybody do anything, right? I get that. But what you can do is create the circumstances around the person to require that either you exhibit this kind of behavior or we're going to have to separate. I'm going to have to keep my distance from you. If you don't want to take care of yourself, you know, we can't be together, right? You can't sit with us. And so that's what I mean when I say grace. Remember, it's patient, loving kindness. It's not making excuses. It's not enabling. That's not the same thing.
This is why I love you so much. And this is why I love doing this podcast. People are like, what? Because I like to learn with things. And it's so simple. You just made me realize what grace is. Like, I knew what grace was, and it's like a grace period. But right. I understood that now, where it's like, give him grace. I love that answer.
Patient, loving kindness. You know what I'm saying? Like, step back.
Yeah.
Condemn the language, condemn the behavior.
Yeah. And
recognize it's going to take him time to get better, and there's certain things he needs to get better. And then the loving kindness is just be more understanding. Acknowledge what he's dealing with. Yes, it's ridiculous, the stuff he's saying, and at the same time, I can acknowledge clearly he's not okay.
Love that. Stephen A. Smith recently released his book, and he spoke about his issues with his father. Charlamagne has been very open with his issues with his father. I, in my first book, spoke about issues with my dad. Can men have daddy issues?
100%. 100%. It's such a great question, and I love the lead in. You've just named 3 men who have daddy issues. And I think part of it is, again, the language that we use. When we say daddy issues, immediately Jasmine Sullivan comes to mind, right? I should start thinking about the album Hotels and like all the discussions in between each of the songs. And you hear some of that. And so I think it really is this idea of, one, to answer your question directly, 100%. Secondly, it is just, what's the framing, right? If there are challenges around men's relationships with their fathers, that's not a fault of the child. So Trent, I would say you, Stephen A, and Shar, y'all don't have daddy issues, right? Because that's loaded. Instead, what you have is a difficult relationship with your dad, right? Because of things maybe the dad did. So framing it a little differently, I think takes some of the sting out of it. It's still painful, but it also acknowledges that there's a part of it that you didn't have any control over, right? And there's a part of it that they were things that were done to you or things that maybe weren't done because there was neglect or whatever the case may be. So yes, men, to answer your question, yes, men can have those challenges with their dads.
So if we should take that sting out for men, should we take it out for women too?
100%. Yes. I mean, like, I know we don't have a lot of time, but yes, because you think about it's just this thing where it feels like so much of it is, if we say a woman has daddy issues, then what we're doing is saying, in some ways, this is how I interpret it, I'm an N of one. We're blaming that woman for stuff that she didn't have any control over. If daddy was absent, she didn't have any control over her dad being absent. If dad was abusive, she didn't have any control over that. And so as an adult, I think the part that we can be responsible for as women is acknowledging that there were some challenges there if we do have those kind of challenges with our dad, with our biological dad or the stepdad or whoever it is. And then all we can do is work on our part. What did his absence mean for how I show up in relationships with men now? What did his abuse toward my mother mean? Or, his partner, maybe we grew up with two dads. What did one dad's relationship to the other dad mean for how I relate to men as an adult? I can only own my part of it. And I think if we can get people out of being responsible for other people's mistakes, I think that can go a long way toward helping people see that there are things that they can do and manage. And there's some stuff you can't do nothing with. If daddy don't want to get his mind right, you can't fix that. And that's okay. You can work on you.
Definitely. Okay. I love that answer. You have done a bunch of work on, you're a trauma specialist, but trauma bonding. And it's such a deep rooted issue that we could do a whole show on trauma bonding. So I just want to tell people out there to Google Dr. Alfiee trauma bonding. It is literally mind blowing. Like, I went down a rabbit hole for an hour and a half, but in one of the interviews we were talking about trauma bonding, you said this, and I would like for you to explain it to me more. You said there's something about the absence of chaos that makes us have to deal with ourselves.
Ooh.
Oh, I was just like, can you please break that down for us?
Yes, absolutely. So first, let me just commend you for all the homework you've done, right? So whoever you and your team are, y'all nailed it. You got all the homework. So I'm respecting it. And I'm learning from it. I'm like, oh, I think I need to do that, more of that. So I appreciate that. The chaos, what I mean by that is the chaos gives us, I won't say an excuse because that's loaded. It gives us something to pay attention to so that we're not paying attention to exactly what is hurting us. It helps us avoid dealing with the pain. It helps us deflect from the pain. So the chaos is there to give us something to focus on. And it also allows us to avoid what comes behind the chaos, which is dealing with the reality of the experience. And so I think as long as we allow ourselves to stay stuck in, well, he or she did this, or they did this to me, or, do you know what I mean? Like, we keep letting ourselves go back into those difficult relationships. Because remember, the whole idea of trauma bonding is you have a person who can't pull themselves away from that person who's hurting them. That's effectively what trauma bonding is. It's just a label for not being able to pull yourself out of it. But most of us never end up in that place where we can't pull ourselves away just like that. That's over time. You've been worn down into that space. And so the chaos is what you get used to in a trauma bonded relationship, because the chaos is what gives the perpetrator control over the relationship. It's keeping you off guard. It's never allowing you to get your footing. Because remember, when you get your footing, I remember this a long time ago, this beautiful psychologist, her name is Dr. Maya McNeely. She taught me this. If anybody practices martial arts, there's this art called Aikido. Okay. And part of what you learn in Aikido is like a low center of gravity and keeping like enough distance between your feet that you steady yourself. If you get off kilter, people can move you whichever way they want to move you. But if you're steady, they can't. that's how I like to ask people to think about the absence or presence of chaos in the context of trauma bonding and experiencing trauma. The chaos keeps you off center. And if you're off center, I can do with you whatever I want to.
Wow. I think a lot of people walk into therapy and think they're going to get fixed like they're getting a BBL or a mommy makeover.
Right, exactly.
And then when they're not fixed, they blame it on the therapist.
Yes.
So my question is therapy always a lifelong journey? Is there ever an end to it?
I think it depends on the person. So the quick answer is yes, I think there can be a finite beginning and end to therapy. But that doesn't mean that's the only finite beginning and end, right? You might start with somebody when you're 16 and that takes you through the junior year of high school, and then you go 20 years, right? And you're in your 40s now, or 30 years and you're in your 40s now, and you go back, right? For some people, they go at one period in time and they never go back because they don't feel a need to go back. So I think the therapeutic process is a lifelong journey, but the practice of engaging in therapy, the way we traditionally think about it, can often have a finite beginning and end. And those two things can happen at the same time, right? So once I teach you, like your CBT skills, once you learn those CBT skills, you may be a person who can go off for the rest of your life and you don't ever want to come back because you feel like you have what you need to be successful. Whereas somebody else, they might need somebody to bounce ideas off of forever, and they don't have that anyplace else in their life. And so they're always going to be in and out of therapy. So I try to think of it as, again, extending grace to people to make coherent and clear decisions about what type of therapy and the length of therapy is right for them. And sometimes there's some people who need more help with making those decisions than others, but it should always be, I think, a personal decision for a person who has the ability to make those decisions for him, her, or themselves.
Again, on the Red Table Talk, I loved all your Red Table Talk stuff. You touch, and I wish you guys could have gone in a little bit deeper on this, but I'm going to try to do it here now. Jada started talking about her binge drinking, and you touched a little bit on alcoholism. And I loved that because a few weeks ago, I got into a discussion with my brother-in-law, and I'm like, I'm not saying that we're alcoholics. Like, we're Jamaican. We all drink, right? And he's like, Trent, you go out on the weekends and you get smashed. And I'm like, yeah, well, you have a drink once every day. He's like, yeah, I have one or two drinks just to take the edge off. And then my godson was there, and I'm like, could you go out to a party tonight and not drink? And he's like, I'm not too sure. And I'm like, let me ask you another question. If I told you for all of 2023, you go about your life, go party, travel, whatever, you cannot have one drink. He's like, gosh, I can't do that. Right. So could you help me kind of break down the different levels of alcoholism and the effects of alcohol?
So the effects of alcohol, well, let me start with the different levels and sort of degrees.
Forget about the effects. Sorry, just talk about the different levels.
So the different levels, there's substance use, alcohol use, and then there's alcohol abuse, right? And so most of the time when we're talking about alcoholism, we're talking about alcohol abuse. So again, what most practitioners or clinicians would do or therapists would do is go back to that DSM, and they would say, do you meet a certain set of these criteria? If you meet this many criteria, maybe two, maybe that's persistent alcohol use. But if you meet 4 or 5 of these criteria, okay, now you've moved into the realm of alcohol or substance abuse. And really, the easiest way to think about what is that line? The line is, does the use of alcohol impair your day-to-day living? Does it cause negative impacts consistently on your day-to-day living? So, for example, going back to your example, when you say, could you go a year without drinking? If somebody says no, okay, my hairs on my back of my neck would not necessarily stand up, right? Maybe it's just like you don't want to go without drinking. But if you said, could you go a week, or could you go 2 weeks, or could you go a month and don't drink? And the person said, no, I don't think I could do that. And then you say, okay, well, calibrate for me, because this is what a clinician is going to do. They're going to say, okay, calibrate for me. Give me an example of when I say you can't drink, how long do you think you could go without drinking? And then within that, what would happen to you if you didn't drink for this period of time, right? And if the person starts talking about, well, child, I got to have a drink first thing in the morning before I go to work because I just need the edge off. Or I got to have a drink 5 nights a week when I come home for it because them people nuts. And you know what I mean? They driving me crazy. And then I'm thinking, okay, now maybe we have a problem. So it really is all about context, the context of the circumstances under which you drink, how often you drink, what does drinking do for you or not do for you? Those are the things you want to be thinking about in terms of deciding whether or not a person has slipped into this realm of substance abuse versus substance use versus being somewhere in between. Does that answer your question?
It does, and it's just, again, I'm trying to knock down stereotypes because people think, again, like I said, depression. You're in your bed and you can't move. Right. That's not only depression, and it's not like, oh, alcohol. No, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not in the street drinking 3 bottles of vodka a day, and begging people for money. But this, and I learned that through therapy. I talked about that in my second book, and I wouldn't say I was an alcoholic, but I do think I had issues with alcohol. And what I learned about that is that I was using alcohol to self-medicate myself.
That's it.
That was my issues with alcohol. Go ahead. What are you going to say?
That's it. And it just made me think there's substance dependence. Exactly. So when you talk about that person in the street, that typically, when we just that visual, that's substance dependence. That's somebody who literally cannot get through their day. Without drinking. Like drinking is sort of the gas or the fuel that makes them go. Or so, they've rewired their body to feel. So what you're describing is, I would think, more in the realm of substance abuse. Like maybe there was some control over it, maybe not. But the substance dependent person, they kind of don't have any control over it. And I think it's being able to recognize those tiers.
Yeah, exactly.
That is really important for people. So I'd love that you are knocking down those stereotypes. And it's so helpful to give us a way to look at our own behavior, right? Because so often it's sort of like, well, I'm not that, so I'm fine. You may not be fine even if you're not that. You may be sort of on the way to that, but you got to be able to have a way to calibrate across these different levels or these different tiers, particularly in the area of substance abuse or substance dependence or substance use.
Definitely. You gave an eye-opening explanation about medication that blew my mind. You said, medication is not a happy pill. It's about helping people who are suffering so badly that they can't even do talk therapy. Can you break that down?
Yes. And I think it's true, because when I think about the families I worked with over the years, particularly when you're talking about psychotropic or psychiatric or mental health medications, right? All those labels all means the same thing, particularly in families of kids of color. When people hear meds, what people think is, oh, you are so, I'm not really with that word crazy, but you so crazy that you need pills to be sane, right? And that's sort of the spectrum that people are on. It's either you're so far out there, the only way you can function is pills, or you're fine. And there's, like, to your point, to echo you, there's so much stuff in between. Yes. So for me, what I try to say to people is, if you are one of those folks who is having such difficulty functioning day to day because that mental illness or that mental health concern is weighing on you so heavily that it's negatively impacting you, then maybe medication is the thing that's going to help you get to a place to lift you just enough that you can go sit and talk with a mental health professional to learn CBT skills or motivational interviewing skills or interpersonal therapy skills or whatever that approach is. But if you don't have that and you can't get out of the bed, how in the world are you going to do talk therapy? And then some people say, well, you can do it, electronically. You can do it through mHealth. Okay. But if I don't want to pull the covers off the top of my head because the light hurts my eyes because I just can't function, then I can't go sit up and sit in front of a computer. It might take all my energy to get up and go to the bathroom or get up and brush my teeth. Yeah. So the idea is we want people to be able to benefit from talk therapy, but you can't benefit from talk therapy if you can't function. And sometimes the medication is there to help you just do that. For other people, the medication is there as an enhancement to talk therapy. Maybe they are functioning, but the talk therapy is just not doing enough. And so the medication is a supplement to allow them to get to where they want to be.
Yeah, I love that. And I have a friend of mine, and he said it was okay if I say this. I'm not saying his
Okay.
name, but he had like an issue with driving, and he was not able to drive from Montreal to Toronto. He used to do the drive all the time, and all of a sudden he couldn't do it, and he was just has anxiety on the road. He can't even pass the truck. And of course, you know me, I'm like, bro, you got to go to therapy. You know, every day
Yes.
I tried, and he just won't go. But he's like, oh, I went to speak to my family doctor, and he put me on these anxiety pills. And I'm like, well, how are they doing? He's like, well, it's a little bit better. I'm driving, but I still feel anxious. And we literally just drove back from Toronto the other day. And he's like, I'm getting anxiety passing this truck. And that's what, and I know he's listening to this. And I hope it gets across to people. And I think that's what I'm trying to do today is break down these stereotypes. And the pill is not a happy pill. You're not going to take it and be like, oh my gosh, like I have no anxiety. So I love that you described it, that it's like, anyways, you just described it, but it just gets you to that place where you have to do the work. Like you got to do the work. Even if we talked about getting a BBL or a mommy makeover, if you do your research and find that, you don't just walk in, you have to do some exercises before that. You have to get your cardio and your stuff to a certain level. And then after you have to do it. So it's the same thing with mental health and therapy. You can't have bipolar disorder and just take medication, i.e. Kanye West, and think, oh my gosh, you're going to be perfect. So it's the work. Oh, anyways.
Exactly. And I always tell people, I love to explain this to people. The way you explain it is perfect. And I always add this enhancement. There's the fast way, the slow way, and the best way. The fast way is what your friend did. You go get a pill. It lifts you enough. Okay, now I can drive. The slow way is no pills. You go do talk therapy, but it's going to take you a while to get to a place where maybe that talk therapy is giving you the skills to be able to drive. The best way for many people is to have both. Right? Be open to the idea of everything that you just said. You got to prep, and then you got to put in the work. So the prep might be the pill, or the prep might be the talk therapy, and then putting in the work is adding that other piece as an enhancement to give you the full picture. And for some people, they may never need the medication, and that's okay too. It's just, what can you tolerate? What are you willing to work at? And knowing what you're willing to work at is going to really put you on the right path to get the right mix, medication and or talk therapy. But the way you described it was perfect.
Thank you. Intake. How important is intake? How important is it to surround yourself with the right people, the right foods, and the right environment?
Oh my goodness. I feel like that's everything, because I feel like that's a preventative measure, right? Before you get to this place where, you know, you're having such a struggle that you're either self-medicating or you're avoiding or you're stuck in the house because you can't get out. And I think if you can be really mindful of something I learned a long time ago, was watching Oprah, where there was a woman on, I don't even remember who it was, where she said that you are responsible for the energy that you bring into this room. I think this woman at the time had been in the hospital, and it was like she was in the hospital for a really long time. And that's when she had the realization there were certain people who would come in the room and the energy they brought with them was negative, and it would make her feel worse. And then she got to a point where it was like, you can't come in here. Clean your energy up. Clean the vibe that you're bringing in here so that I can heal. And so I think there's a part of it that is just what you said, surrounding yourself with the right nutrition, the right foods. Maybe it's a work in progress. You always work on it. It's not going to be perfect, but you're working at it. It is the people. Are you surrounding yourself with people who make you feel worse? Or are you surrounding yourself with people who uplift you and support you, right? And it's your behaviors, right? And so what kind of choices are you making in your environment, in your bedroom, in your living room, in your apartment, or wherever it is that you live, that are supporting and uplifting you? So it's all of the above, just as you said. And for me, a lot of that is more preventative than it is an intervention, but it also can be an intervention. So if you're struggling, improving your surroundings and your nutrition and how you behave can really help lift you out of some of those challenges that you might be experiencing. And going to therapy, you know, is a big help as well.
For sure. Although I don't agree with his politics, I did read Dr. Oz's book, You on a Diet, years ago. It literally changed the way that I ate. It was so like mind blowing to me. And you don't realize, like, you eat a burger and you're like, oh, I don't feel all that great today. Well, you know, it's so connected, our body, and we don't realize it. Again, that's a whole other show, what nutrition could do to your body, and sugars, and, you know, having a glass of water before you eat and everything. So anyways, I just wanted you to touch on that. I think mental health is trending now against the new generation, but I still don't think mental health is cool. Like, I think if mental health was cool, I think it would be a lot more accepting. What could we do as mental health advocates? And this would be a very hard question to answer, but you're a genius, so hopefully you might have an answer to this. But what can we do to make mental health cool?
A couple things. To make mental health cool, we do exactly what we're doing now, but I also think is in addition and not but, it has to be everywhere. Reality, right? Yeah. Reality TV, people like reality TV, in the media, and what you're doing with the podcast and what I'm doing with my podcast, it has to be everywhere. So I think that's partially how we do it. And I also want to shout out Carson and Shar, because what they do for men in terms of talking about mental health and what you're doing for men in terms of talking about mental health, that also makes it cool, because people look at you all, and they're like, oh, okay, well, they balling out and they doing all this cool stuff and they've talked about mental health struggles. So maybe it's not the worst thing in the world if I have them. I think that's how we make mental health cool.
Understood. Okay, I have 2 more questions and then I'm going to personal. Yes. Is Katrina okay with time? Yeah?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so it's Katrina, right? That's the girl who I was emailing to schedule this. Okay, cool.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure I didn't get her name wrong. Shout out to Katrina. She's super nice. Okay, so, all right, so 2 more questions. So these are things that people say that the reason why they don't want to go to therapy, and I want you to help me to reply to them. Okay. I think over time, I, on my own, can deal with my own issues that are bothering me. I don't need a stranger giving me tools. I can handle it on my own.
What I say to people is, again, this whole thing, there's the fast way, slow way, and the best way. Let's just jump to the best way. The best way is to acknowledge when there are things outside of our control. Just like with the car. That's like saying, my car broke down, I can fix it. No, you can't. If you're not a mechanic, you can't fix the car. So there are going to be certain things that you're going to encounter as a part of your life that you will need some help with. So instead of looking at that person as a stranger, you don't go to the mechanic and say, he a stranger, he can't touch my car. Or Jiffy Lube over there, you let Jiffy Lube fix your car because you trust him. So I think it's the same thing.
I love that.
With the mental health professional. Find somebody who resonates with you and let it be, and let them help you.
I love that. I think it's too long of a process, and I don't want to dig deep into my issues, and I don't have the time to make that commitment personally or financially.
You find the financial piece, I say, is straightforward. You pay for the things that you value. Are you not valuable enough to invest in yourself so you can be the best version of yourself? That's money. Mm-hmm. Are you also not valuable enough that you're worthy of investing the time that is necessary for you to be healthy? And then what I also say to people is, you can't take care of anybody else if you're not taken care of. And for moms and dads, this always gets them. What signal are you sending to your child or that loved one? Maybe it's a younger sibling or a niece or a nephew or somebody who's looking up to you. If you say that you yourself are not valuable enough to invest just a little bit of your time in the grand scheme of all the hours you have in a lifetime and taking care of yourself, that's what I say to people.
I love that, because my godson, he's like, oh, I think I want to go to therapy. I'm like, go. And he's like, oh, it's expensive. And he's saying that with a Louis backpack that he paid $1,500 for. So I'm just like, what are you talking about, bro?
That part, exactly.
All right, let's jump into getting to know you. I have a few questions, and then I will let you go, okay? What is it about therapy that you love so much? Like, you literally have to listen to people's drama and difficult life every day. Like, is that not depressing to you? What do you love about it so much?
Because it's my purpose. That's the easiest way I can say it. I know what it feels like to struggle. I know what it feels like to feel isolated. I know what it feels like to feel like people outside of my family, sometimes inside my family, don't understand me. And so if I can be someone that someone can lean on to help them get to a place where they feel seen, heard, and valued, that is literally my purpose on this earth. And I would be just a bad person to not use the gifts and talents that I've been given in that way. So that's literally what it is for me. I know it's my purpose. I embrace my purpose. I love my purpose, and it gives me fulfillment. So that's why I do it.
Amazing. Seeing that you're a specialist, does that mean that you have all the tools? Do you lead a perfect life?
Absolutely not. That's why I meditate. I've been a meditator for 19 years. That's why I do a lot of what I do. And people should know, I'm going to tell everybody a secret. Ain't going to be a secret no more. Most of the time when you see me do like these one-on-ones with the camera and I'm describing things, I'm often describing things that are really important for me. So at the same time I'm saying them to people, I'm saying them because I need to hear them too.
Wow.
So no, I don't live a perfect life by
that.
any means. And I also say to people, perfect is relative. We're born perfect, and throughout our lives, you've heard me say, we grow into a more perfect version of ourselves. So I don't live a stress-free life. I don't live a life without challenges. I live the perfect life that I'm supposed to be living, and I'm always wanting to evolve. I am excited by the idea of evolving into a more perfect version of Alfee. That gives me purpose, that gives me motivation, and I love it.
Do most therapists go to therapy themselves? Like, do you do therapy yourself?
I have in the past, but most don't.
Okay.
Most of us do not. That's a fact. No, some do. When you're in training, you have to. They call it supervision. It's basically therapy. I don't care what anybody says. But a lot of folks, but absolutely, when I have needed it, 1,000%, I have absolutely gone.
If a therapist is diagnosed with having bipolar or depression or any other mental illness, can they still practice?
Yes, they have a duty ethically. Whatever the guild association you belong to, psychology, psychiatry, doesn't matter. Social work, counseling, you have a duty to be healthy enough, right, that you can do. It's like with any job. Having a mental illness does not prevent you from doing your job if you are managing that mental illness and it's not impairing. So yes, people who have mental health challenges absolutely do this work and can do this work.
Wow. Yeah, I have two more questions.
Of course.
How is it being a parent and being a therapist at the same time? Your average parent has a couple of steps ahead of your child because you're older, you're wiser, you know.
Right.
You're a psychologist, and I've met your daughter before.
Right.
You have 100 steps ahead of her. Like, you know what's going on. How do you approach being a mom while being a therapist?
I try. I know I don't always get it right. I try to listen. And I try not to, I use this word around the house, I try not to therapize them. And if I do therapize them, I try to say up front, okay, look, this is mom putting on Dr. Alfiee hat. Can we please have this conversation? And I try to ask if it's okay for me to go down that Dr. Alfiee path. And sometimes my kids will tease me, right? They'll be like, okay, I need to talk to Dr. Alfiee, right? And we'll sit down like, okay, this therapy session. Or they'll say, could you just be my mom? My son is good for that. Could you just be my mom? Could you just not be Dr. Alfiee or a therapist for one? Okay, if that's what you need, I'll just listen. So I try to set clear boundaries. I said I try. And I'll say, do you need me to listen? I do this with all my family. I'm the boundary queen in my family. Do you need me to listen? Or do you want my advice? Or do you need me to be, like your therapist? And if they can set those parameters for me, it makes it much easier for me to engage. And I had to get to that because it used to just be people would tell me all their stuff and I would immediately go into Dr. Alfiee mode. And I've learned that's not always what people want from you. So just because you have those skills doesn't mean those skills need to be on, that on switch 24/7. So I try to set those boundaries so that, and I try to leave room for people to ask for what they need from me so I can show up as that person.
Gosh, that must be difficult. Last question. When it's all said, when it's all said and done, what do you want your legacy to be? When people talk about the AAKOMA Project and Dr. Alfiee Noble.
Oh boy, that's such a great question. So I want my legacy to be that I was a person who does the following. I always say this. May you kindly and easily share your light with everyone you encounter, knowing the goodness of the universe in every moment. That's what I want my legacy to be. That when people think of me, they think of me as a person who gave them space to shine their light, and that when I was with them, I was shining my light in the best version possible.
Wow. You are a bright, shining light. Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for letting me go 5 or 10 minutes over. You're amazing.
Thank you so much, Trent. And I'm looking forward for this coming out. I'm so excited. And just good luck with all the work that you're doing. And we're going to get you to the expo this year.
Definitely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It's your boy, Trent Out Loud. Peace!